Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to thank each of you for joining the show today. I'm really excited to talk about cybersecurity and all things related to that today. It's like we're talking right off the headlines. The headlines all week have been talking about ransomware and cyber attacks hitting the US government and commercial enterprises everywhere this week. So I want to welcome my guest, Bob Parisi. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Kevin, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bob is head of cyber solutions for North America at Munich Re. And what does the Re stand for, Bob?
So Munich Re stands for Munich Reinsurance Group. So we are a large German reinsurance company. I'm part of what would be described as the smaller end of that company, doing direct risk direct insurance as opposed to reinsurance.
So where are you calling in from today?
So, normally you'd get me out of our new New York City offices in Midtown, but today I'm working from home. I'm in Pelham Manor, which is a suburb in southern Westchester County.
So, Bob, you graduated with a BA in economics. I'm an economics and poli-sci guy myself, and then you went on to get your law degree from Fordham University. How do you end up in cybersecurity?
Yeah, Kevin, it was really just kind of a right place, right time situation. I just happened to be at AIG. I was working as what's referred to as divisional counsel or in-house counsel and chief underwriting officer for professional liability back in the late 90s. When AIG hired a group of Chubb underwriters, and they were hired to create an insurance product. You think back to the late 90s, that was the whole dot-com economy. The AIG folks sent me in there to make sure that the new Chubb hires did it the AIG way. So, as we developed products, it became apparent that, really that traditional property and casualty insurance products were not suited for that dot-com economy, that e-commerce, and those risks. For companies whose operation, if not entirely based in the web, was very different. So we worked with several brokers, eventually fleshed out, which of these new cyber risks we deemed were insurable. And we spent about the next 6 months crafting policy wording, underwriting manuals, materials. So what has started as really an exercise in improving our ability to underwrite and insure technology companies evolved into an entirely new line of coverage.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you have to figure out how to insure and protect the digital environment as opposed to a building or a physical asset.
Yeah, exactly. It's, and just to kind of add on to that, property carriers and other lines of coverage, they've got tons of data, 100 years of weather. I've got maybe 5-10 years of information, and then also dealing with the word cyber, which is incredibly overused. But just like for this conversation, maybe we kind of set a standard. When we talk about cyber risk in the insurance space, we're talking about companies or their risk from relying upon technology and handling data. So we use cyber as a shorthand.
Got it. So okay. Bob, you've spent many years doing this then. How have you seen it change over the last 5 or 10 years?
I wish technology only changed every 5 or 10 years. I've been in this space long enough to remember very clearly a time when physically locking the door to the computer room behind you was the state of computer security. In the last decade or so, the risk environment and technology has changed so much. It really has exploded. Things from the migration to cloud to the whole let's all go remote overnight during the pandemic to, the topic we're going to talk a little bit more about, AI. The one thing that's been constant in evaluating cyber risk has been constant change. if you think about when I started doing this back in the late 90s, 97, 98, think about what technology was like in 1998 compared to what it's like now in 2023. Just the smartphone alone is something that just didn't exist back then. So it's been a constant change.
Wow. And so the threat surface has increased every year, I imagine. And that's why mobile is one of those things suddenly that you can access important information from anywhere from a device in your pocket. And that device is mobile, which means it can be lost or damaged or stolen or any of those kind of things. Wow.
Yeah, if you think, I think someone made the comment that, just walking around with a smartphone, you've got more computer power than they had at Grumman when NASA sent a man to the moon. So it's hard to put that in context, especially for folks that weren't alive back then.
Absolutely. So today, of course, the world's mesmerized by generative AI, myself included, and I use it all day long. So what are the risks involved with this explosion of usage around generative AI? And, what are you thinking about it today?
Maybe it's because I've been fortunate enough to be part of the generation that grew up really amazed by the space program and frankly, cable TV, that I've become a bit jaded. AI has a huge potential, whether it's generative or any other kind, has a huge potential to improve the way we work and interact, but it's also got a very real capability of causing some pretty catastrophic harm. But so is nearly every new technology. I remember watching an episode of Downton Abbey where they were in absolute panic over electricity and the telephone. So I'm not answering your question directly, but I'll kind of harken back to one of my favorite authors. It's a quote from Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's kind of like AI, right? You say, hey, do this for me, and it does. If we want to kind of look at it a little bit more plainly and lay out some discrete concerns about AI, number one, there's privacy violations. There's the deep fakes, which obviously has become very, very, kind of right there in the forefront. Talked about in terms of especially politics. We've seen it discussed there. You've got things like algorithmic bias caused by bad data. And the one that I learned about recently, which, it put a smile on my face and then it scared the heck out of me, was AI can hallucinate. And it can give you a response that it will tell you it's absolutely positive about, but it's making stuff up. So those are just kind of four of the things that that I do worry about when I think about how is AI creeping into what we do and how we do things.
Oh yeah, well, in the first weeks of using Chat GPT, the first thing a lot of us do is we ask it about ourselves. And we ask it, talk to me about Kevin Benedict's CV and his, biography. And so it goes in there and it has me attending Stanford and all kinds of big schools, which I've never attended as a student. So yes, I certainly saw that. And if you ask it to go back and rethink what it's doing, it'll apologize and then bring you back sometimes a more accurate version. But yeah, as a predicting machine, it has some challenges sometimes, especially when there's not a lot of data on a particular subject. Then if it doesn't find it, it's like it has this ego where it can't go back and say, I don't know. So it has to make something up.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a fabulous sometimes. It won't tell you that it's not sure. It'll just come out. It's always confident in its answer.
Oh, that's too funny. So from your job, where you're looking at the risk that different things cause, what kind of risk does your group even cover? Risk related to artificial intelligence? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's kind of two ways, right? AI is just another type of technology. So when we're talking about ensuring cyber risk, AI is just part of that larger basket of technology that companies can use or are using and we'll evaluate that in the context of how they, how they're handling all of their technology, and AI will be part of that question set. At a more specific level, we do have, and we have basically come to market with AI specific insurance that drills down on performance guarantees as to AI might be deployed to do a certain thing, and has it achieved that, and has it achieved the level of the service level agreement. So we can actually deploy insurance coverage against that performance guarantee of artificial intelligence. But at the end of the day, it's now it's different than other types of technology, but it's just another type of technology. One of the fun things about cyber insurance or cyber risk is that, we're talking about AI now. A couple of years ago, we were talking about IoT, cloud. I can almost guarantee that, if you have me on again next year, we will have an entirely new type of technology that we're all either really excited about or really concerned about, that we didn't even know it existed, as of today.
So I reached out to some of TCS's experts in cybersecurity and just said, what are some of the key topics that we really should cover? And one of the responses that came back said, ask about industry standards. How does a company know if they're doing it, if they're secure in the right manner? Are there standards, or do you guys use standards to judge how much exposure a company has? I mean, how does that all work? How do you quantify the risk?
Yeah, sure. So not surprisingly, the insurance industry came at this from the point of view of, where they were sitting. It meant that the people with finance backgrounds, legal backgrounds, we didn't have a lot of CISOs on the staff. So what we did was we relied upon other technology companies. When I was at AIG back in the late 90s, we partnered with IBM and Unisys. And what we did was we took the standards that were out there, the ISO 2700 standard, the CIS security controls, eventually the NIST framework came along. So there are a lot of standards that are specific to different industries. Energy has its own standard. And what we did was we looked at it from the point of view of almost a governance exercise. How are the companies that we're looking at, how are they dealing with their risk according to these standards? Now, you can actually get certified against some of these standards. And there are plenty of companies that will audit you against your level of compliance. What's changed recently, and what I find particularly helpful, is it's less about certification against the standard than about your movement up in the maturity level against the controls that people are using to evaluate it.
Interesting. So beyond the typical cyber security issues, Bob, that we face, there's all these kinds of deep fakes, as we mentioned earlier, reputational attacks. There's swarming issues where some influencer will say something against your company, and when you wake up in the morning, you're in the middle of politics because you've been, your products are now politicized and you had no intent of going that direction. Suddenly it impacts your sales and your brand reputation, all this. Do you guys get into there? Is that part of the stuff that you guys think about on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, we certainly think about it. That's, the boycotting, the politics stuff is not typically what we will include in the coverage. That's more of that reputational risk. And there is coverage out there for reputational harm and reputational attacks. Typically, though, what will happen, and some of the things you talked about, often are part and parcel of a larger attack, or an attempt to do other kinds of harm, and may have also been involved some other breach of security. What's interesting, and deep fakes, certainly scare me personally, because it's like, well, is that real or isn't it? But some of the things I think that people, what we get lost in is that we just assume everything's going to be these complicated, 25th century, Star Trek, Star Wars kind of activities. Most attacks on companies, maybe not the ones that cause the most harm or the largest, but most of the attacks are fairly simple. They're the phishing attacks that you referred to. If they're going after large, high profile or, the VIPs, they actually call it whaling. But, one of the most, I'm going to say, I'm going to praise a criminal activity, but one of the most, simple and beautiful attacks that I saw was they would take a thumb drive, they would attach it to a key fob, they would put house keys, car keys, they would put things like, the frequent customer tags that we all have on our house keys, and they would drop it in the parking lot for the company that they wanted to penetrate. And what would happen would be someone would see what looked like an innocuous and fairly innocent thing, just keys, car keys, happen to have a key fob. It's in my parking lot. It must be someone that works with me. So they're now, but on that thumb drive is some really nasty malware, ransomware. They walk that past physical security. So, the criminal couldn't get past physical security normally. They walk it into their office. They go, well, it's got no name on it. Oh, look, it's got a thumb drive. Why don't I plug that into my computer? And, and this is where the genius part is. What they will see is they will see folders that will say things like, summer vacation, Heather's graduation, what have you. And they'll click and there'll be real pictures of people. But behind that is just some nasty data, some nasty code that's getting downloaded. And no one will know that it happened because it will never appear on that particular screen that anything happened. I mean, wow. The genius level behind that is amazing. So I'm getting a little excited about criminal behavior, but it's, if you think about that, that doesn't take a building full of computer scientists, computer engineers hacking away at keyboards. All it takes is someone who's able to download on a thumb drive and drop something in a parking lot. So the ways that companies are attacked, vary dramatically. Now, some of the worst attacks are coming from those sophisticated computer attacks. I'm not going to name the entities or the countries, but they have intense computing power, and they will go after someone, and it will be a very sophisticated attack. But that's the other end of the spectrum.
So, Bob, at a high level, when a company comes to you and says, "Hey, can you cover me?" I mean, what's that process look like? How do you evaluate the level of risk you're willing to take, and what kind of quality or maturity that company has in regards to cyber security?
Yeah, so Kevin, just as we kind of mentioned before, we do rely upon various standards, the CIS security controls, ISO standards. So what will typically happen is it'll start with a pen and paper exercise, an application that will get to the very basic stuff, trying to get as much information as we can. That usually also involves companies sharing information, publicly available information. A lot of times it's the CISO sharing with us the quarterly report or the annual report that they present to the board. Once we ingest that information and analyze it, we'll go back to the applicant with questions. And what will happen is, typically working with an insurance broker, they will schedule time with either the CISO, the chief privacy officer, the general counsel, with the underwriters who are bidding for or looking to write the business.
Right.
And they will do a presentation. We will ask them questions, and we'll go through that. So it starts at a governance level. How does this company at a high level deal with and handle its reliance upon technology, its use of data? And then it'll get drilled down with follow-up questions, typically direct to really the the people who are in charge of deploying those kind of controls and managing that risk. So it's a conversation. Now, there's also a variety of companies out there that do what I would describe as outside in and analytics of companies. So never doing anything penetrative to the entity, but will scan their systems, see what reports are open, will generate reports, and will do these kind of scanning tools, reports that are often utilized by underwriters. There are companies out there that also will be agnostic as to the level of security of a company, but will just analyze the financial impact of, well, we don't know whether you've secured that portion of your system, but we're just going to say if that portion of your system went down, here's the financial ripples that will come about because of it. And you've seen a lot of that analysis now rise to the level of concern at the SEC, the World Economic Forum. There's a variety of companies that are doing that in that context. So we look at it both in a view of, how good are you relative to these standards, relative to your peers, and then also what are the dollar values associated with if something bad does happen. If you can't access this server or that system, what does that mean in terms of the revenue that you might lose?
So it seems that once you sign a policy with a client, you guys have a vested interest in reducing the risk. Do you guys have consultants or something that are advising clients once that happens?
So yeah, that's a great, you're spot on. And I would say it varies dramatically based on revenue of the company that's being insured. Those mom and pop high street companies typically look to the insurance company for some of what I describe as those value-added services. They are not the company that's going to have a dedicated chief information security officer. There's going to be someone wearing 3 or 4 hats. So they look to the carriers, and the insurance community, the cyber insurance community, has actually built up a lot of these services, what was described to me once as kind of the, it's a break glass and the shiny red fire engine comes and takes care of me. So there are, carriers that will write these smaller companies, and they do provide both risk mitigation, risk prevention, education type services that the insured company can utilize either in the midst of a crisis, can use as part of their a way to augment their own risk management, educational tools, and that is a very big part of the cyber insurance ecosystem. My job is at the other end of that spectrum. It's I'm responsible for the group that looks at large multinational, multi-billion-dollar revenue companies, which typically aren't looking to their insurance company for, what technology they should use. A company that's, a $500 billion company already has a CISO. They already have relationships. They already have all of that baked. They've got their own blue, red, and purple teams that are, looking at the risk and helping them understand it. So, while we are happy to, and we're active on social media, my group, we interact with some experts back in Munich, guys that are, InfoSec threat, true threat analysts there. They've got their PhDs, and we're active in providing information. So it varies from a true handhold and an assist to really just a pure risk transfer exercise.
So your company works with a lot of other insurance companies as kind of you're reinsuring the work that they do. What is the message to a board? If a board does not have coverage in this area, what's the opening line to a board of directors?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I started my career on the carrier side. I did 15 years on the sales side as a broker. So that was often an opening line, like, have you spoken to the board about this? What's interesting is that this is a board level issue now. It's the CISO typically reports not into some other technology person. They're probably reporting into a board committee. So, looking at this as a risk that needs to be managed and not a problem that you can solve just with, by spending more money on technology. That's really the message. It's getting across to the board that this is an operational risk. And once you put it into that category, it becomes a very different issue. And as I said, we've seen regulation come down, New York FINRA. We've seen the SEC issue a variety of guidances. Again, it tops the risk register for the World Economic Forum, I think, for the last 10 years. This is a key risk that companies face, more so even than things like climate change. If you take it that this technology-based risk is your biggest problem, it has to be a board level issue. And when we look at clients, if the board is not engaged, if we're not seeing that kind of digital DNA, coming down from the board and up from the entry-level employee, that's an immediate red flag for us, because it means there's a disconnect somewhere. And once you start looking at that disconnect, that's where that disconnect is going to become highlighted in the event of a crisis. And that's where, frankly, that's where companies and insurance companies spend money, is when they're not resilient, when they're not ready for that crisis, and they're having to look at how to respond to this issue when their hair's on fire.
Wow. So, Bob, let me ask you to put on your futurist hat for a minute. Where do you think cybersecurity is going to be 5 and 10 years from now? How do you expect that it will evolve?
Yeah, I think the way you finished off that question is really the way to look at it, right? We're looking to manage cyber risk, whether it's AI, privacy breaches, supply chain disruption, ransomware, or any of the ensuing crises out of those events. But it needs to be a constant evolution of combining people, processes, technology. I hate to use another cliche, but it truly is a journey, not a destination. If you want something really specific, I see AI as being much more of a part of the arsenal that CISOs can deploy in managing and defending a company. There's so many things that they need to be on top of, to be monitoring. Being able to use a tool like AI that has that, going beyond narrow AI and moving into, some machine intelligence, being able to put some of the, the basic stuff in the hands of the AI, so that you can work on and, put eyes on a screen that need to be truly adaptive to what's going on. I think AI has a potential to, again, we talked about its disruptive component. I think it's, might well exceed any disruption it can cause used as a tool for the CISO.
Wow. In my mind, I'm envisioning an enterprise and then these concentric rings around it. And many of those rings can be automated with AI that are watching for penetrations or breaches or disruptions or any of these kinds of things at a level that is beyond what humans are capable of doing.
Yeah, no, it's all the logs that these folks are having to review. Up until now, it was very, again, I'm not a technologist, but I'm sure I'm misusing this term, and it was very binary. Now having AI be able to take a more subjective look at it and react and see, you'd be able to pick up trends that would not have gotten picked up by that binary look. That alone should be a tremendously helpful in managing this. And really, it's seeing those trends. It's seeing what's, it can help someone get a better sense of what's coming around the corner at me. And often it's like the bow wave on a boat. It precedes the boat by, a foot, inches. if AI can detect that bow wave before that boat comes, so that you can know that boat's coming, that's a huge benefit that will allow a CISO, general counsel, whatever, to to be prepared,
Yes.
to get ready, as opposed to having to react.
Bob, I want to thank you so much for sharing and kind of pulling back the curtains on the world of cybersecurity, especially from the perspective and point of view of the insurance and reinsurance industry. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. This is an area that a lot of us don't have a lot of visibility into. So thank you for opening the gates and showing us what's behind it.
Kevin, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.